to Dr. Mark Milstein.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to share with you the latest insights into how to age-proof your brain. And what I mean by that is really just how do we get the best out of our brain each day to improve our memory, our focus, our productivity, but also how do we protect our brain years from now? And so we will talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. And of course, that's a very serious and intense topic, but we're going to talk about it today in terms of hope, because we now know that there are little things that we can do each day that can lower the risk of Alzheimer's and dementia anywhere from 30 to 60% based upon lifestyle factors. I like to say little things that make a big difference. And the dual benefit is these same little things that can protect our brain years from now also just allow us to feel our best each day, get the best out of our brain each day. So people say, well, what's the secret? How do I do this? Well, my big take-home message is that it's all about keeping your brain young. And it turns out that the brain has two ages, the number of years you've been on this planet and how old is your brain really. And so what we were going to talk about is how do we keep our brain younger than our actual age? Our brain can be older or younger than our actual age. We want to keep it younger. So we'll talk about how to do that. So people say, well, what's the secret? Is it these things? Is it the Sudoku, the puzzles, the brain games? Is that the answer? And usually somebody says, please say yes. Somebody else says, please say no. Please tell me it's not those things. I don't want to do those things. So even though we hear about the crossword puzzles all the time, they're not the big impact. If you like doing them, keep doing them. They're a piece of the overall puzzle, but they're not the thing that's really going to protect your brain. So if it's not the crossword puzzles, it's not the brain games, I would say the most common question I get asked is it those pills that I see advertised on TV, the ones that promise to boost your memory? Is that the secret? Well, I was giving a talk not too long ago. Somebody came up to me. They said, I ordered those pills off of the commercial, and I have to tell you, they're really improving my memory. I said, that's interesting. What's the name of the pill? And the person said, I don't remember. So that sums up the magic pills. Not a magic pill, not a crossword puzzle. Instead, it's some surprising things that really make a difference. And the reason why they're surprising is that they're surprisingly simple, but they're also not happening directly in our brain in all cases. They're happening in other parts of our body, but they impact our brain. So the focus of today is going to be actionable take-home tips, little things that we can do each day to protect our brain. Okay, so before we get to these take-home tips, I just want to give you just a quick bit of info on this idea of brain age and that your brain can be older or younger than your actual age. And we live in incredible times where we can just take a picture of someone's brain in a brain scan. And what we see is that starting at the age of 40, the brain can start shrinking about 5% every 10 years. And as you can imagine, that shrinking can devastate your memory, your focus, your productivity, just how you feel. But what we clearly see is that this doesn't need to happen. We can slow this process down. And what we're going to be talking about is we really just want a full, plump brain. We just want to keep our brain from shrinking. Now, we understand how to do this. So one of the key things that we can do to protect our brain short-term and long-term is really just optimize our sleep. And so sleep is one of the most powerful things we can do for brain health. And it's not just the number of hours of sleep that you're getting, it's how effective are those hours. So we're going to do a quick pop quiz, and then we're going to get to some tips on sleep. But I want you to take a look at these words: cottage, Swiss, and cake. Can you think of a word that goes with all three of those words? What's a word that goes with cottage, Swiss, and cake? Did you get cheese? We'll do one more: cream, skate, water. Did you get ice? If you didn't get it, don't panic. It's okay. It can take some practice. But the idea is there are experiments where they take a group of people and they say, okay, everybody, we're gonna divide you into two groups. One group, you're gonna take this quiz or test. We're gonna let you get a good night's sleep, and then we're gonna retest you in the morning. The other group, same quiz or test, but we're gonna wake you up a few times throughout the night and retest you all in the morning. Now, the group that gets a good night's sleep, their scores on average go up, and the people who don't get a good night's sleep, on average, their scores drop. And for years, people said, well, this is obvious. This group is just rested. That's why they're doing better. And the other group is just tired. But there's more to it. There's something happening when we're asleep, specifically while we're dreaming, that is critical for our memory. So learning something new is one of the best things you can do each day. We'll talk a little bit more specifically about what I mean by that. But when you learn something new, you force some of your 80 billion brain cells to reach out and make a new connection. That happens the moment you learn the information, and it holds the memory of what you just learned. But tonight, when you go to sleep, while you're dreaming, your brain will find every new connection you made today for every new thing that you learned, and it will run electrical stimulation over those new connections, making them stronger, making them stick. So if we don't get a good night's sleep tonight, we miss out on strengthening of our memories. We just won't remember the things we learned today nearly as well. And just to highlight the importance of this, we now know that one of our biggest risk factors for dementia or significant memory loss is sleep apnea. In fact, we now know that individuals with untreated sleep apnea, on average, lose their memory about 10 years before the general population. It sounds scary, but if you treat the sleep apnea effectively, that risk pretty much goes away. And it's going to be the theme of what we're talking about. We've identified these factors that might not seem related, but they are, and we have good treatments for them, so we want to take advantage and treat these conditions so that we can protect our brain. But beyond sleep apnea, it's also just about getting a good night's sleep each night so we can make those memories stick. So I want to share with you something that recently won the Nobel Prize that can optimize our sleep. This is your brain clock. It's your suprachiasmatic nucleus or your brain clock, and it's right about there, and it's something that's about the size of a head of a pin, a little tiny clump of brain cells. And a little bit of insight into how this brain clock works can help us fall asleep faster, sleep better throughout the night, get more restful sleep, and also wake up feeling refreshed. So I want to share with you just a little bit about how it works, then we'll get those take-home tips. So imagine yourself in bed at night, you're lying there in the dark, all the lights are off, your brain clock notices you're in the dark and causes your brain to release melatonin. When you release enough melatonin, your brain basically falls asleep. But how do you wake up? Well, there's a few ways, but the way that your brain is really alert, focused, ready for the day is that your brain gets in the presence of some natural light. And even if your eyelids are closed, the light streams through, the brain clock notices it and it shuts off the melatonin, and your brain wakes up. So we see light and dark are playing a role, but we need to go one step further because it turns out that your brain clock is like one of these old-fashioned timers. Remember, you play a board game and you turn it over and you start the countdown. Well, every single day, and that's the key point, you do this every day. Every day you do something that starts the countdown to when you're going to fall asleep at night. So the question is, when do you do this and how do you do this? How do you start the countdown to fall asleep? Well, we start the countdown, we now clearly understand, every morning by getting outside in the presence of some natural light for about 10 minutes, within about a half hour of waking up. That starts the countdown to us falling asleep at night. And it sounds so simple, but we actually realize that we're actually preparing for every night's sleep in the morning, not just 10, 15, 20 minutes before bed. And what we've seen over the last couple of years is more issues with memory, more issues with sleep. And what we believe is happening in a complex process is we weren't getting out as much. We're spending more time at home. So something that's really simple, actionable is soon after getting up, if you have a dog, walk your dog, check the mail, go to the front yard, the backyard, go to a balcony. That little bit of light in the morning not only helps you fall asleep at night, but it's becoming one of the hottest areas in medicine because we now know that this brain clock, we're calling it a master regulator. It actually plays a role in our mood, how you're going to feel. It plays a role in metabolism, weight loss, weight gain. So something so simple, but something we can overlook can have this profound impact on multiple aspects of mental and physical health. Just a little bit more morning light. Now, I want to take a moment and I want to talk to you about the idea of the cleanliness of your brain. And I know this might seem like an odd idea, but it's a way that we can conceptualize and visualize a bit about how the brain ages. It's a piece of how this works. And if you think of your brain as something that's about 3 pounds, every year it makes 5 pounds of waste, trash, and garbage. 5 pounds. And as you can imagine, we have to remove this waste and trash. These are leftover chemical reactions and broken down proteins. And if you think of your brain like a house or an apartment, if it fills up with too much trash or waste, it's hard to find things, it's hard to be productive, it's hard to focus. Same thing in the brain. And what we realize is as we get a little bit older, our brain's ability to remove this waste and trash becomes less efficient, less effective. So we've identified things that we can do to remove this waste and this trash, to keep our brain essentially clean, which is youthful and protected. So just to highlight the importance of this and put it in perspective, Alzheimer's disease is one specific disease that causes the symptoms of dementia or causes significant memory loss. It's not the only cause of dementia, but it's one of the most common. And in Alzheimer's disease, one of the things that we see is a buildup of a certain type of waste or trash in the brain. We call these the plaques. So what you're seeing here is 3 healthy normal brain cells on the left. They can talk to each other, they can communicate. But on the right, these brown splotches, these are plaques. These are clumps of essentially garbage, certain types of garbage that clump together, and they interfere with the brain cells' ability to talk to each other. These brain cells eventually shrink, and that devastates memory. It's not the only thing happening in Alzheimer's disease. It's a piece of the puzzle, and it just highlights that we want to be removing all types of waste and trash from the brain. So how do we do it? Well, let's talk about 3 things we can do to remove this buildup of waste and trash in the brain. So the first thing that we can do is tonight when you go to sleep, something odd is going to happen in your brain. Your brain, inside your skull, at certain points during the night, is essentially going to shrink down to about 65% of its current size. I know that sounds like a horror movie, your brain shrinking and squeezing while you're sleeping, but think of your brain like a sponge. And what's happening is that it's squeezing out the waste and the trash that just builds up normally throughout the day. And when you squeeze it out into this empty space that's created because your brain is essentially constricting, then fluid, we call this cerebral spinal fluid, comes up from the spinal cord and washes this trash away. So every single night you squeeze out the garbage at certain points during the night and you wash it away. We're actually calling this a brain wash. And what you're looking at is this is one brain cell, this blue line, and this red stuff, for lack of a better term, is this waste, this trash. It's being squeezed out and washed away. So if we don't get the best night's sleep, and we wake up with that kind of foggy, fuzzy feeling, at its essence, this is too much trash left in the brain. That's part of what's happening. And we're concerned about that buildup day to day and years down the road. So that's where that morning light becomes effective. It sounds so silly. We can roll our eyes, big deal, morning light, but it's safe and it's effective. It's rooted in brain science. We want to turn to these solutions before we turn to, for example, the over-the-counter sleep aids or the medications that can make you feel drowsy, like certain allergy pills. And understandably, people are looking for something that can help them with sleep. But we now know that these over-the-counter drowsy-inducing medications significantly increase the risk of memory loss or dementia. And what we're concerned about is that these medications, in part, they don't allow the brain to go through that washing process effectively. They just leave too much trash in the brain. So we don't want to turn to these as sleep solutions. So what else can we do? Let's do one more sleep tip, and then we can talk more about it in the discussion and the Q&A. Feel free to put any questions in the Q&A box. But one more sleep tip. And let's get this sleep tip from Pete Sampras. Do you remember Pete Sampras, one of the greatest tennis players that ever lived? He figured something out about 15 years before brain scientists. And what he figured out was that when he was on the tour and he was playing in tournaments all around the world, he would check into hotel rooms and he would always bring with him black masking tape. And he would take this tape and he would cover up every little light source in his hotel room, even that little red light on the TV, you name it, he covered it up. And at the time we thought, this is odd, this is strange. He was onto something. Those little bits of light that seem so insignificant, we now understand can add up to something we call light pollution. And even if our eyelids are closed, these little bits of light can pass through our closed eyelids. They can interfere with the brain clock that we were talking about. They can interfere with its ability to release enough melatonin to get us into the deepest stages of sleep where the brainwash takes place. So we're connecting the dots on something that doesn't seem so significant, but can have an impact. So tonight, when you go back to your bedroom, take an honest assessment. Are we sleeping in the dark, or have we gotten used to these illuminated rooms? You don't have to get out the black masking tape. You don't have to go that far, but just try experimenting with maybe unplugging something that emits light, making your room a little bit darker, getting your phone farther away from the bed so it's not flashing all night long. These little bits of light we now understand can throw off not only our sleep, but there's evidence in new studies that they can throw off our heart rate when we're sleeping, our insulin response, our blood pressure. We believe these lights aren't allowing our brain to get into deeper stages of sleep and give us true rest. In fact, a study came out just this summer where they had people wear an eye mask, like a sleep mask, and they took a memory test. The people who wore the eye mask did better on the memory test than the people who didn't. And it makes sense if we think about it, that darker presence or that darker room or less light, better sleep. better memory function. You don't have to do an eye mask if that's too much, but something to experiment with. But just making the room a little bit darker, a little bit more darkness at night, a little bit more light in the morning. Two simple things that can optimize our sleep and protect our brain. Now, I want to share with you two other things you can do to keep your brain clean besides sleep. And instead of a brain wash, let's talk about a power wash to your brain. Let's think about if you've ever power washed a backyard or a garage, you get that spray going, you get the hose out. Well, you can pretty much spray your brain with something called norepinephrine. Imagine just spraying away the debris. Now, I just want to tell you quickly that there's a group of people called superagers, and they've been studied all over the world. And there are people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 100. If you test their memory, they have the memory of someone decades younger. In some cases, they have the memory of someone who's 25 years old. People say, what's their secret? Well, they do the things we're talking about, but they prioritize this power wash to the brain. They do it several times a week. And we power wash our brain every time we learn something new. People always ask me, what do you mean something new? Do you mean, should I be downloading those apps and those brain games? Is that what you're saying? Well, it turns out that playing the apps and the brain games, they make you better at, guess what? The brain games and the apps. But it doesn't seem to carry over to day-to-day memory. What really seems to be effective is just pick anything outside of your field of expertise, something you're not trained in, and do it a couple times a week. The key thing is that it's new. It could be a foreign language, a musical instrument, a new sport. It could be painting, a podcast. It's the newness that causes that spray of norepinephrine that helps remove some of the debris. Now, to highlight the importance of this, we also know that one of our big risk factors for dementia or memory loss is hearing loss. In fact, if the hearing loss is just mild, it doubles the risk of dementia. If it's moderate hearing loss, it triples the risk of dementia. It sounds scary, but if you just simply treat the hearing loss with something like a hearing aid, that risk pretty much goes away. And what we're concerned about is that if someone's not hearing, they might not be learning. They might not be engaged, taking in new information. So hearing is something we want to be on top of. We want to treat, another avenue to protect the brain. It also brings up something that is important to mention, which is that one of our other big risk factors for memory loss and dementia and also depression is just feeling isolated or lonely or disconnected. In fact, it raises the risk of dementia about 50%. On the other hand, there's studies that people who go to dinner parties have a lower risk of dementia. Now, you don't have to go to a dinner party if that's not your thing. And what we believe is happening is that at a dinner party, we're social, we're engaged, we're learning new things, we're using our hearing. So just finding some moments during the week to make a phone call, a text message, meet a friend for lunch, anything that we can do to be social, could be in person, could be Zoom. We just want to have that feeling of connectedness. It's critically important for our brain health and something we can overlook easily. Now, we've talked about 2 ways to clean your brain. We have one more to go. We talked about the brain wash of sleep, and then the power wash of learning new things, being social, and taking care of our hearing and our senses in general, taking in information through our senses. But this third way to clean your brain is one of our biggest breakthroughs in brain health, because it doesn't just lower the risk of dementia, it also lowers the risk of depression and anxiety. And this third way to clean your brain is happening right now. As you're sitting here, you have this amazing human cell swimming around your brain, gobbling up trash, garbage, and waste and toxins for you. And it's called a microglia. Just imagine it right now swimming around your brain, gobbling up the garbage. Now, the microglia doesn't quite look like this, but it's hard to get a picture of a microglia. And if you've ever seen a fish tank or an aquarium, you see that bottom feeder gobbling up the trash at the bottom of the tank, you have something just like this in your brain. But the problem is these microglia can get confused. And instead of eating the trash, what do you think they eat? The good stuff, the healthy brain cells. And that's when we see devastation to memory. That's when we see an increased risk for depression and anxiety. When our microglia, our own cells, make this mistake and they get confused and they start attacking healthy brain cells. So at its essence, our big question is, how do we just keep these microglia focused so they just eat the garbage and they don't make this mistake? Well, we now understand that this is very much related to inflammation. See, these microglia are part of our immune system. And when the immune system makes a mistake in other parts of our body, it causes inflammation. And so there can be inflammation in our joints or our gut or our heart. And that's almost like a fire. It's like these parts of our body are inflamed, they're on fire. And just like a fire releases smoke, well, inflammation in the body can release what we call factors, and they get into the bloodstream. They leave the site of inflammation and they travel, and they can end up in the brain. And in the brain, these inflammatory factors, they confuse the microglia into going into attack mode. So essentially what we're saying is any inflammation from the neck down can send confusing signals to the brain. So we just want to put out any fires from the neck down, no smoldering fires. So we want to be on top of inflammation. We want to treat autoimmune conditions, chronic injuries. Thankfully, we have really good treatments for inflammation now over the last couple of years, big strides forward. But we also want to know if we have inflammation. So the next time you're once or twice at your doctor's appointment, ask your doctor about a CRP blood test. It stands for C-reactive protein. It's mainstream medicine. Sometimes you have to ask for it, but it's a good test to determine if inflammation is present. Ask your doctor if it's appropriate for you. Simple blood test. If the inflammation is present, we want to bring that number down. We'll talk about ways that we can do that. But in a moment, I'm going to give you what I call the one piece of paper. It's the key test that we now understand that if we can keep these numbers in normal ranges, we can really protect our brain now and years from now. And inflammation is on that list. But what else can we do? What's something simple we can do to lessen inflammation? Well, one of the most powerful things we can do to lessen inflammation is just think about what's happening in our gut. This is this gut-brain connection, because a lot of the inflammation is rooted or emanates from our gut and can spread to our brain. And so some foods fan the flames of inflammation and some foods help put the fire out. In fact, there's something called the MIND diet, or a Mediterranean-like diet. This diet's been studied over and over again now for a decade. And we consistently see that people who sort of follow this diet, they lower the risk of Alzheimer's by about 35%. People who strictly follow this diet, they lower the risk by about 53%. So what's on the diet? Well, we see it's vegetables, nuts, berries, beans, whole grains, fish, poultry, olive oil. Wine made the list, 1 glass a day. The only time I ever got a standing ovation was when I mentioned that wine was on a brain healthy diet. So alcohol can be a bit controversial, and we can talk about it more in depth in the discussion in the Q&A. It can be individualized, but it's included in moderate amounts in this diet. But really the take-home message on this diet is the totality of the diet. And the diet is really just whole natural foods most of the time. A study came out recently that found that just eating this way about 80% of the time had a lot of brain health benefits. So it's good news. We don't have to be perfect. And in all the complexity and individualized aspects of diet, we see in the data something that just keeps coming out consistently, that there's one simple thing that we can do to protect our brain that goes a long way. And it's just thinking about minimizing one thing when we're eating. And that one thing, I can pretty much sum it up by, I was in a museum in Chicago, the Science Museum, and if you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. And if you go there, or if you've been there, you might have seen that they have a Twinkie that they unwrapped about 13 years ago now. It's sitting there unwrapped, and it looks great. It looks like you could eat it today, and it would taste like you unwrapped it like 5 minutes ago. That's what we're worried about. The foods that never spoil. It's the additives, the preservatives, the ultra-processed ingredients that are inflammatory in our gut, and that inflammation can spread to our brain. So the next time we're eating something, if we just check the packaging and we're like, I can't pronounce any of this stuff. This looks like a chemistry experiment. I don't recognize any of these ingredients as food, or most of them I don't recognize. Those are the things we want to minimize. That one simple tip goes a long way for lessening inflammation in the gut and thus protecting the brain. But let me give you one quick tip, one quick bonus tip. And that is that if you love broccoli and you love spinach, I'm sure you want to get the benefits of these foods. If you don't love these foods and you're forcing them down, I'm sure you want to get the benefit too. Nothing worse than eating the right foods the wrong way. And so we now understand that these foods, if they're prepared a certain way, they lose their benefits. So let's do spinach first. Spinach is loaded with something called lutein. It's one of the best things for your brain health. It keeps your brain cells healthy, keeps them youthful, helps them communicate. But if you cook the spinach, you pretty much destroy the lutein, losing the brain health benefit. So studies are showing us that if you eat the spinach raw, it's better. But even better than that is thinking about chopping it up. That helps the lutein get released. And then if we want to get the lutein not just released, but absorbed, we actually see that if we put the spinach in something like a smoothie, or we blend it and add something like an avocado or Greek yogurt, the healthy fat helps the absorption of the lutein. So just a way that we can get the benefit of these foods and really help our brain. Okay, let me ask you this question. Have you had this happen? Have you gone to the refrigerator? Have you opened the door and said to yourself, why am I standing here? Or you meet someone, you say, I'm going to remember their name. I'm going to do it. They tell you their name, and what happens? It just disappears. And people say, oh no, I feel like my memory isn't what it used to be. I'm getting concerned. Well, I want to reassure you that these moments of, where did I put my keys? Where did I park my car? What was I just doing? They're normal. If they're happening with increased frequency or interfering with our ability to get through the day, we want to get on top of it because there's things we can do. We're no longer at the point where we say, oh, there's nothing we can do. There's things we can do. But I want to share with you something simple to lessen these annoying memory snafu moments. And it relates to this part of your brain. This is your hippocampus. And I apologize. I know this is disgusting. So I'm sorry if you're eating right now, but this is essentially your short-term memory. And anything new that you see or you hear, the information first goes to this part of your brain and it waits there for about 7 to 10 seconds. We can think of it, it's like the waiting room for your brain. And in that time, while the information's waiting there, the rest of your brain decides, is this information worth it? Or is this a complete waste of my time? If it's worth it, the information leaves the hippocampus or the waiting room and it's transferred on to other parts of your brain where you're going to remember it. We call that long-term memory. If you're not going to remember it, or if it's not worth it, I should say, your brain throws the information away. We like to think our brain wants to remember. It really just wants to forget. There's just too much going on. And so our brain evolved to have this filtering mechanism to filter things out. So the question becomes, how do we remember the things we want to remember by getting past this filtering step? So the next time you're standing at the refrigerator and you're like, why am I standing here? Why did I walk into this room? What do I want here? Really ask yourself, what happened in the last 7 to 10 seconds? Did you get a text message or a tweet or a phone call? Did you check TikTok? Did somebody call your name? Did you think of something else? What we realize is that if we're not focused on the information for about 7 to 10 seconds, our brain throws it away. It sounds simple, but we're often living in a world where we don't spend 2 seconds remembering where we parked our car or put our keys, we're on to the next, or we're multitasking. We're on 2 screens while we're cooking and texting and calling, and we're wondering why information doesn't stick like it used to. It's because our brain is just saying, this is all probably not that important, and throwing it away. So something remarkably simple is just using our brain as it evolved and saying, I need to remember this in the moments we need to remember. I'm just going to focus on this and nothing but this for about 7 to 10 seconds. People are surprised how much more they remember as their brain goes, oh, this information must be important. I'm going to give you my silliest tip of the day, but it's rooted in brain science. The next time you want to remember someone's name and you don't want it to just disappear into thin air, right after they tell you their name, right after they tell you, imagine writing their name on their forehead. Why does that silly trick work? Because it takes a few extra seconds and your brain goes, oh, this person's name must be important, and focusing on it. The information leaves the hippocampus, goes to long-term memory. So sometimes a few extra seconds goes a long way. Now, we're getting near the time for Q&A, so I just have a couple more points. I want to give you some quick take-home tips, actionable things we can do. And we're just going to spend a moment talking a little bit more about the hippocampus, because this is the part of the brain that shrinks in dementia. It also shrinks in depression. But we clearly see now that there are things that we can do to take this part of the brain to the gym. It's like we can work it out and make it bigger and stronger, so it's better able to hold on to information and pass it on. So what can we do? Well, the first thing is, what do you think is the impact of stress on our hippocampus, on our brain in general? Well, we've been told over and over again that stress is bad. Here's the big surprise. Stress is one of the best things for your brain. Now, there's a caveat before you say, wait, what? The caveat is that the stress has to be manageable and we have to be able to take a break from it. And it's that cortisol, the stress hormone. It's one of the only things we know of in a burst, in a moment of stress. It actually helps our brain cells grow. It's like something you want to get done, a challenge you want to tackle. That's all good. But too much cortisol and not taking a break from it, and the same part of our brain, the hippocampus, starts to shrink. So the brain is like a car. If you don't drive it and you leave it in the garage, it falls apart. If you overdrive it, it falls apart. So we actually want some stress. We just want to take a break. And so a little bit of traffic is okay. Somebody in line at the grocery store with more than 10 items, it's okay. These little moments, things we want to get done, challenges, we just want to take a break. So how do we do it? In a world where we have so much stress coming at us from every possible direction these days, And that's where mindfulness has moved from a new age mystical idea that people like me did not take seriously. And it's turned into mainstream medicine, where people like me do take it seriously because we see the brain scans. And before you say, I'm not into mindfulness, let me just tell you what we're seeing. Somebody can practice mindfulness for a few minutes a day, and within a few weeks to a few months, their brain changes. It looks different in a brain scan. Their hippocampus, the memory part of their brain, looks bigger and stronger. So we're searching for something that works, and this is one thing that does. It also changes the brain in a way where the brain is better able to take a break from stress or anxiety or anger or worry. The brain changes in a way where it gets stronger at turning off those emotions. Now, what's mindfulness? Well, in brain science, it's really just being about in the present moment. It's about just being right here, right now. Because if we think about it, a lot of our stress oftentimes is thinking about the past or thinking about something that might happen in the future. But in many cases, right here in this moment, stress levels tend to drop. Cortisol levels drop down. So in these studies at Harvard and Yale, where they change people's brains in a few weeks, what are they doing? Let's try something for 5 seconds. This is what they do. When I say breathe in calmness, breathe in through your nose. When I say breathe out anxiety, breathe out through your mouth. We'll just try one. Breathe in calmness, breathe out anxiety. We'll do one more. Just focus on the breath going in your nose and out of your mouth. Just put yourself in this moment. Breathe in calmness, breathe out anxiety. That's pretty much what they do. And it's just when we're focusing on our breathing, we're just putting ourselves in the present moment and not thinking about all the other stressful things that are happening. Now, people say doing a breathing exercise is about the most stressful thing I could imagine doing. Well, I understand. But it doesn't have to be done on the beach. The sun doesn't have to be setting. You don't have to put on spandex. You can do these little things anywhere, anytime, little moments throughout the day when we just feel our stress levels rise up. And if a breathing exercise is not for you, that's okay. We're seeing studies pour in that just being in the presence of nature for about 10 minutes and cortisol stress levels plummet. There's something about nature that's just nurturing to the brain. And it doesn't have to be a national park. It could be a parking lot. It could be a little greenery, a little tree, a local flower bed. Something about when the brain sees nature, cortisol levels plummet. In fact, there's studies that have been done in Japan where they have people stare at a plant on their desk for 2 minutes and their stress levels drop. So just little things. We're always trying to figure out what are the little things that can make a big difference, and nature's something simple that we can utilize to manage stress. 2 more studies, then we'll have time for questions. We've talked about a lot, but there's 2 things we can't leave this talk without mentioning. And one is, in this study, they followed thousands of people for decades. And they found that if they did this one thing, they lowered their risk of dementia by about 60%. What would that one thing be? What's something we haven't talked about that have this surprising impact? It was getting 30 minutes of walking in a day. Didn't have to all be done at the same time. 6 5-minute walks, 3 10-minute walks, 30 minutes of walking a day had this profound impact. Now, people say, do I really need to walk? Well, we now know that if you walk, you release something in your brain called BDNF. It's a growth factor that keeps your brain cells youthful. Walking a little bit farther from an appointment, the grocery store, walking around our house or apartment, the office, it all counts. Now, exercise, it's not a surprise that it's good for us, but people always ask, what do I need to do for my memory, for my brain health? Well, if you think about it, exercise helps you sleep, it helps blood flow to the brain, helps those microglia, helps balance the immune system. But if you're like me, and this looks like a total nightmare, I have good news for you. It's not about the marathons and the triathlons when it comes to brain health. Intense exercise can be good for some people in certain situations, but what we're seeing is that the threshold for a lot of protection for brain health, for memory, is just getting your heart rate up for about 6 to 10 minutes most days of the week. So they've done these studies where even in that 30 minutes of walking, if people take 6 to 10 minutes and do a brisk walk, like a little bit of a power walk, they perform better on a memory test. So there's something about just these moments of getting our heart rate up each day. It doesn't have to be, a massive change. Beyond that can be great, but the threshold for protection is not as much as we once thought. In fact, this is one of my favorite pictures. This is people taking the escalator over the stairs to the gym. And the reason why I show you this is that they actually have done studies where they see that if people just take the stairs over an escalator or an elevator a couple more times during the week, their brain looks more youthful, more full, more plump. Again, just little things. These incidental moments can add up and be helpful for our brain health. This is that important piece of paper. Next time you're here once or twice at your doctor appointment, which is important to do for our brain health, is just have this conversation. I want to be on top of inflammation. What about checking my CRP? Heart health. We now know that a lot of our issues with memory and brain health actually are rooted in issues with heart health. AFib, we want to treat it. Want to be on top of cholesterol. We now know that blood pressure in our 30s and 40s can impact our brain health in our 60s and 70s, but blood pressure at any age is important. And we're seeing that a number around 110/70 makes the brain look younger. So knowing that number, we have great treatments for blood pressure, just being on top of it. And then also asking about a really simple blood test called homocysteine. Ask if that's appropriate for you because it detects silent damage in the heart that could be impacting our brain decades before we'd see a memory symptom. But what we realize is that even little dips in oxygen throughout the day can impact how our brain works that day and years from now. So we want to be on top of heart health. Again, an avenue where we have a lot of treatments that are really excellent. We just want to take advantage of them to protect our brain. And we can't leave this talk without mentioning that diabetes, if it's not treated or not managed, is one of our single greatest risk factors for Alzheimer's. In fact, it raises the risk by about 60%. But if you treat the diabetes, that risk pretty much goes away. And it's just another example of a condition that doesn't seem related, but it is. And if we can treat it, we can protect the brain. So it's just an avenue we want to take advantage of. So we want to be on top of blood sugar. Even pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, want to treat those too because they can be doing damage to the brain. Last two studies. One of the most common questions I get asked is Alzheimer's genetic? Well, we now know that in 95 to 99% of all cases, Alzheimer's is not strictly genetic. Genes can play a role. They can raise or lower risk, but they're not determinant in 95 to 99% of all cases. That means even if we're seeing it in families, in the vast majority of cases, it's not strictly genes. This means that there's things we can do. We're not destined to lose our memory in almost all cases. And in fact, you can take people who have genetic risk for Alzheimer's and you can put them on an intervention. You have them do all the things we've been talking about, optimize their sleep, put them on a mind diet, have them be social, treat the underlying conditions, everything we've talked about. The people who do these things, compared to the people who don't, the people who do these things, their test scores go up 25%. Their ability to run their day goes up 83%, and how fast their brain works goes up 150%. So what we see is that we can make the brain work better each day, and we can also protect it and lower the risk for things like Alzheimer's and dementia significantly. So there's a lot more hope here, a lot more empowerment than we ever had. Now, this waste and trash that we've been talking about, it can build up in the brain over decades, 10, 20, 30, 40 years before we'd see a symptom. So it just means we want to do these little things now. And I don't want anyone leaving this talk thinking, oh no, I'm having trouble sleeping, or I have this underlying condition, I'm destined to lose my memory. In almost all cases, it's not one thing. It's the accumulation of factors. So it's kind of like the straw that breaks the camel's back. But we've identified so many of the straws now that we just want to take control and take as many straws off the camel's back as we can to push odds in our favor and control what we can control. Last study, I promise, but it's one of my favorites because they took a group of people in their 80s. But this applies to many different ages. And they said, is there anything we can do that can make the brain look younger, more full, more plump, that's better than walking? They used walking as exercise. And now walking is about as good as it gets. But they found one thing that beat walking in this study. Any guesses on what that would be? Or have you heard this study? What would beat walking? What would make the brain look younger? It was dancing. Why dancing? Well, dancing it's mental. You have to learn new things. It's physical. You have to move. It's social. It's stress relief. It involves hearing. It's a lot of things on the list. You might be like, yes, dancing, or no, please. Anything but dancing. I don't want to dance. If you don't want to dance, that's okay. Tai Chi, very similar results in another study. It's mental, it's physical, it's social, it's often outdoors, stress relief. If you don't want to do Tai Chi, you don't want to dance, just think about playing a sport a couple times a week. Pickleball is taking over the world. Studies have been coming out that pickleball is good for your brain, but any sport, if you think about it, it does a lot of things on the list. It's mental, it's physical, it's social, stress relief. Now, I hope you leave here with some of the best things you can do for your brain. And I appreciate you having me here. I appreciate you being here. I know these things aren't easy to talk about, but we need to talk about them because we're not where we were just a couple years ago where we were like, we don't know. We don't know if there's anything we can do. We now know there are things that we can do. So in all this intense data, we realize how important it is to sing and dance and socialize and have fun and learn new things. Because even in stressful times where we're either taking care of other people or focusing on all the things we have to do, we can push those fun things to the bottom of our to-do list. We just want to push them back up to the top, at least a couple times a week. It's just so good for our short-term and long-term brain health. So here's our 6 tips for today. Things that we know can protect our brain now and years from now. Tonight, when you go back to your room, ask yourself, am I sleeping in the dark? Or have I gotten used to an illuminated room? Make your room a little bit darker, see how you feel. Give yourself the gift of a great night's sleep. Give your brain that gift. Keep learning new things and be socially engaged. Manage stress. Embrace some stress. It's okay. We just want to take a break with things like mindfulness or a little bit of nature. Just want to manage it and take a break. Think about that 30 minutes of walking a day. It doesn't have to all be done at the same time, but within that 30 minutes, trying to get our heart rate up for about 6 to 10 minutes. Could be up and down a flight of steps, could be a quick walk around the block, brisk, could be some jumping jacks. We just want to get that heart rate up for about 6 to 10 minutes most days. Think about those underlying conditions, the ones that they don't seem connected, but they are. We have great treatments for. We talked about sleep apnea, how important it is to identify and treat sleep apnea. We talked about diabetes, heart disease, inflammation. We talked about hearing loss. We'll talk about one more. We now know that gingivitis, if it's not treated, raises the risk of Alzheimer's. And at first we say, what? How is that possibly connected? But gingivitis is inflammation in the gums that can spread to the brain, confusing those microglia into going into attack mode. So we just want to, brush and floss your teeth tonight. Dental health is brain health. And eat real food. Eat something that's going to spoil someday. Not when you're eating it, but someday it's going to spoil. And if in the last 44 minutes, if you already did 1 or 2 things on this list, if you learned something new or this puts you to sleep, either way, this was good. This was good for your brain. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to answering any questions. I'm just going to come over here to the box with the questions. If there's any questions, just feel free to put them in there. Oh, lots of questions. Great. Okay. Wow, lots of great questions here. So let me just pull these up. They're popping up. Please keep them coming. Okay, first one that I just saw, does alcohol affect sleep? Does alcohol affect sleep? And the answer to that is yes. So alcohol, although it can make you feel drowsy, and people often use it as a sleep aid, we now know that it shouldn't be used in that manner because alcohol does make you drowsy. And the science we now know is that it destroys something in your brain called glutamate, makes you drowsy because glutamate is a stimulant for the brain. And then about 4 hours later, your brain goes, where did all that glutamate go? Let's make it now. And then it manufactures this stimulant and it wakes you up like at 2 in the morning, 4 hours later. So for that reason, we don't want to use alcohol as a sleep aid. Alcohol is something that can be very disruptive to sleep. So it can be included in a mind diet in moderate fashion. We can talk more about it if you want to go into more depth about it, because we want to be careful with alcohol. There are people where alcohol in any amounts is not beneficial for their brain health. Anything past moderate amounts, we're definitely concerned about. Let's see, a lot of things coming up here about melatonin. Let me see if I can group some of these together. Melatonin and looking at your phone before bed or screens. Okay, these are all great questions. Melatonin is important for brain health, but when it comes to the supplements, we want to be careful. And the reason for that is that melatonin supplements aren't regulated by the FDA. And there's been some concern lately. There was some studies that just came out where they took these, melatonin gummies and they took them off the shelves and they tested them. And they had either too much melatonin compared to what was stated on the bottle or too little or completely different ingredients. And what we realize is that there's not the oversight. So we're concerned with what people are actually getting. The second concern is that melatonin can interfere with other medications someone is taking. And then the third concern is that long-term use of melatonin might interfere with the brain's ability to make its own melatonin, which we call endogenous melatonin. And that's a system we just want to be very careful we're not messing with. So for those reasons, we're saying, let's be really careful with melatonin supplements. They can be used, but we want to push it to under the care of a physician so that we're not interfering with other medications, so the dose is right, so it's not too much, it's not being taken too long. And before we turn to the supplements, as a first line of defense, let's think about how our brain works and what we've uncovered. And so that morning light is really important for melatonin release. For melatonin regulation. And then for melatonin release, the darkness of your room is really important. And then this ties into the other question that just popped up, which is about the screens before bed. And so if you're having any trouble sleeping, the screens before bed, the ones that emit the light, many of them, not all of them, but many of them emit something called blue light. And blue light looks like sunlight to the brain. And if we think about what we were talking about, the brain clock gets confused by this blue light because it's like, oh, this is sunlight coming into the brain clock, and it shuts off the release of melatonin, making it harder to fall asleep. So if you're having any trouble sleeping, one of the things at the top of the list to be aware of is really putting away the screens about 30 to 40 minutes before bed, giving melatonin a chance to be released. That can help you fall asleep. Kids are even more susceptible to these screens because their eyes are still developing, and they want to put away the screens if they're having trouble sleeping about an hour before bed. You know, an old-fashioned book is more optimal for sleep. The light by your bedside is just fundamentally different and not as stimulating to the brain. And you know, if you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, it's okay to wake up. We can talk about that. Waking up is okay. We actually wake up normally as part of the sleep cycle. So if you wake up tonight, don't panic and be like, oh no, I'm not getting my brainwash. I wish I never heard that. It's okay. It's okay to wake up. We just want to make sure we're getting back to sleep, getting a few more washes and rinses throughout the night. But one thing to really resist is checking your phone, because that dose of light at 2 or 3 in the morning can tell your brain it's daytime or the sun's coming up, make it much harder to fall back asleep. So putting the phone out of reach. And what we are also seeing is that one of our biggest concerns for sleep is really not getting at least 5 hours, what we would call real darkness when we're sleeping. And most people need to sleep significantly more than 5 hours, but getting at least 5 hours of real darkness can be helpful in getting these optimal washes throughout the night and really getting into deeper stages of sleep. And if the phone is lighting up or we're checking it throughout the night, that can be very much interfering with our ability to get to sleep. Okay, let's see, lots of great questions here. Let's see, these are amazing, great questions. I'm just going through them, trying to, let's see, combine them together. Let's see. Okay, so we have some questions about getting back to sleep in the middle of the night, and we have some questions about turning off your brain in the middle of the night, and learning new things. So let's do those three. So learning new things, what does it have to be? Somebody asked a great question, like if you learned a musical instrument in the past and then you haven't learned it for a while, is that a good thing to pick up again? Is that learning something new? So musical instruments, one of the best things for your brain because they give your brain a full body workout. And so when you think about things that you want to learn, think about cross-training your brain. And if you think about if you went to the gym, you wouldn't just work out your arms every day, all day, because after a while that probably wouldn't look right. And so the same thing with the brain. So think of your week and think of cross-training your brain. One day a week, think about learning something just new that's, you know, it's like you're going to take a course or read a book or listen to a podcast, just new information, something stimulating, it's new. A couple other days of the week, you want to do something physical that's new because balance is critically important for our brain health. Could be yoga, could be a new sport, could be pickleball, anything where you're learning new movement, dancing. And then the third day of the week, a couple days of the week, you want to say, I want to make sure I'm doing something social. You know, meet a friend for coffee, meet a friend for lunch, you know, go for a walk with a friend. If you go for a walk with a friend, you talk about things that you're learning, you're actually doing all three, so you can combine these. But music is up there with one of the best things you can do for your brain because it actually does combine a lot of the things. It's oftentimes movement, there can be a social aspect to it, and it's learning new information. So musical instrument's great. If you haven't played in a while, as long as you're learning new things within the instrument, that's great. And then having that variety of different types of things to learn. Okay, another question that I mentioned was, we have several things about dreams, a lot of great questions about sleep, falling back asleep in the middle of the night. Is it okay if I don't dream? It's okay if you don't remember your dreams. You're still very likely going through the dream state, which is REM sleep. And whether or not you remember your dreams is in most cases not related to whether or not you're actually dreaming in your brain. they have done studies where they find that people who remember their dreams either wake up during their dreams or they're paying attention to their dreams. And people who don't remember their dreams often are like just not interested, not paying attention. So they don't remember them. So it's okay if you don't remember your dreams. If you have, someone here wrote about what about bad dreams? So that can be very, frustrating and emotional and stressful. There's, therapy that can be done to train the brain to not have as many bad dreams. Think about what you're taking in about, before bed. If it's, scary movies or you're reading things that are scary or scary news stories, that can actually impact what we're dreaming about. And then also, the more you think about what you're dreaming about, the more likely you are to dream about it again, because your dreams, or remember, are part of your making your memory stronger. So actually, not thinking about your dreams is actually a strategy to not repeat the dream that you don't want to repeat. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but it's about how our brain actually works. And there's also some therapies that can be done if someone wants to dig deeper that can be helpful too as well. Okay, getting back to sleep in the middle of the night. I'm going to give you a quick tip here on that. And that is, this is another study that sounds silly, but it's rooted in brain science. And it's that we tend to do one more thing and one more chore or one more text or one more email, and then we're just like, time for bed. And what we realize is we're not taking a moment to let go of information. And so just to put this in perspective, how many phone numbers did you have memorized 10 years ago, 15 years ago? If you're like me, a lot, and now it's very hard to remember a phone number because you put it in your phone. And once you put it in your phone, your brain goes, I'm not going to remember this. It's stored somewhere safe. I'm not going to waste precious resources or memory on this. Let's go. So scientists said, let's use this to our advantage. Let's do a study where we train people in the hour before bed to get out an old-fashioned pen and paper and write down their thoughts, their worries, their to-do list, anything that could wake them up at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning or 4 in the morning with that swirling thought where they can't get back to sleep. And they had people do this. They said, look at the paper and tell yourself the information is safe. So the people who did this, not only did they fall asleep faster, they slept more soundly during the night. They had less what we call conscious awakenings. And if they woke up, they got back to sleep easier. And there's something to this idea of letting go of information before we go to sleep, so it's not waking us up at 2 in the morning. So even like a little bit of mindfulness before bed, decompressing, letting the stress, lowering our stress levels, we need this transition. And we can lose it nowadays because there's just so much to do. So bringing back a little bit of a transition before bed or offloading information. If you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and you have that thought swirling around your head, that's not the time to be thinking about what we need to do tomorrow we didn't do the next day. Instead, think about getting out an old-fashioned pen and paper by your bedside, not turning on too bright of a light, and saying, I'm going to write this down. It's safe. I'm going to deal with it in the morning. Again, it sounds silly, but the people who did this, they scanned their brain. They got better deep sleep, better REM sleep. There's something to we need to just let go of some information when we're sleeping, before we fall asleep, so that we can sleep more soundly. Now, another thing to be aware of, something else that wakes us up in the middle of the night, is blood sugar dropping. And we have a lot of evidence now that what we eat before bed can have an impact on how soundly we sleep. So just being aware of not eating, things that have a lot of added sugar, things that are going to cause an insulin spike and an insulin drop, because that can make it harder, wake us up in the middle of the night and make it harder to fall back asleep. So really thinking about, whole natural foods before bed is a priority if we're having trouble in sleeping and getting back to sleep, and just in general, minimizing those as well. Let's see. Lots of questions about sleep here. Turning off your brain at night, so that will help the not the melatonin, not correct there, the mindfulness and and that technique with the writing down things. Let's see. We actually have hundreds of questions here, so I'm not going to be able to get through all of them. So I'm trying to combine them. These are all amazing questions. What is the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, and what is the correlation? Great question. Let's clarify that. Dementia is what we call significant memory loss that interferes with our ability to get through the day or changes to one's personality. There's many things that can cause dementia. In fact, about 18% of all cases of dementia or memory loss are actually highly treatable. So we always want to dig deeper and get to the root of what's causing the memory loss. It could be a side effect to a medication. It could be a hormonal imbalance. It could be a vitamin deficiency. It could be resulting from something like an injury. So we never want to assume what is causing the dementia. We always want to dig deeper, because in many cases it is highly treatable. Now, Alzheimer's disease is one specific disease that causes the symptoms of dementia. And what we really focused on today is how do we lower risk for Alzheimer's, one of the most common causes of dementia. And so in Alzheimer's disease, we see that in part of what we're seeing is the buildup of those plaques or that trash and that waste in the brain. It's absolutely not the only thing happening in Alzheimer's. There is some controversy about how big of a role it does play. It plays some role, and it's also inflammation in the brain. It's also issues with sugar metabolism in the brain. It's also issues with blood flow to the brain. So Alzheimer's is one specific disease that causes dementia or memory loss, but not the only disease that causes, or not the only condition, or not the only disease that causes dementia. There's other causes. We want to dig deeper and figure out what is the root cause. Great question. Let's see. Let's see. So many great questions. I'm just trying to group them together so we can get as many done as we can. Lots of questions about, let's see, naps. Here's one. Lots on naps. So let's do that one. Someone said, what is the percentage of brain shrinkage after the age of 40? So it's about 5% every 10 years on average, but it doesn't have to be that way. So we can slow that process down based on the things that we are talking about today. Let's see. Naps. I keep seeing naps, so let's do naps. Naps can be great or they can be terrible. And a nap that is great usually is about 30 minutes or less, because you sleep in a cycle, and the first 30 minutes of the cycle are something called light sleep. If you go past light sleep, you end up in deep sleep, and that's that awful groggy feeling it's hard to shake off because your brain is taking a break and being washed at certain points in deep sleep. So if you want to take a nap, naps can be great. You don't have to take a nap, but if you want to take a nap, midday around now is a time that a nap can be utilized, but keep it short. Even setting a timer can be good, so that we're not getting into the deep sleep, which is hard to shake off. If you don't want to nap, there's actually studies that show that just closing your eyes for a few minutes around midday lessens the risk of burnout, lessens stress. And if you think about it, your brain's, it's like a computer, and it's kind of like a computer, or like my computer in the sense that I have too many windows open, and then my computer doesn't work, and I call IT, and what's the only thing they say? Turn it off, turn it back on. That's the only advice I seem to get. Good advice for the brain. There are moments in the day where we just need to close our eyes, take a break, let our brain catch up from all the stimulation that it's reaching, and just take a break from all the things that are happening. So these little things can be impactful too. A nap can be a way to do that as well. Let's see. These are also many great questions. We only have 1 minute left. I want to be respectful of time, but we have, let's see, hundreds of questions here. Let's see. So we'll end on this one. This is one about the CRP test and inflammation. And so we're not concerned about, if somebody's sore from working out, that can be good. Now, if they're chronically sore or they're causing chronic injuries, that's where that inflammation can be more concerning. And someone mentioned, well, what if I have, a joint ache or a neck ache? That's where that CRP test can be really valuable and helpful, because inflammation that is localized just in the elbow or, the knee or the wrist, that's concerning for the joint, but it's just in the joint. But once it starts to spread through the bloodstream, that's when we're concerned about brain health. And that's what the CRP test can help pick up. That's why it's a tool that we can use to determine if the inflammation that someone is experiencing is just localized, or it's what we're calling systemic and it's spreading. So that's just a really good tool to use. Okay, we are at our hour. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you for all the great questions. And I wish you a great and healthy rest of the week and a happy holidays ahead. Thank you so much.